Okay, so this is a quick introduction and tutorial to Ableton. Um, we're going to start off with how to download and install Ableton, or just give you an idea of kind of where to go here. So you're going to go to ableton.com. You will create an account, which should move quickly. You just need to, email and password, verify your account in your email, and you should have an account with Ableton. When you go back to ableton.com, you'll see here, try Live 12 for free. Click that, and the screen will pop up. You get Live 12 Suite, which is kind of Ableton Live with all the trimmings, free for 30 days. Depending on if you have Windows or Mac, just drop down there, download and install. It does take up a few gigs to do so, and it might take a little time depending on the type of computer you're using. So just a heads up there. Once you download and install, you'll open Ableton. It will ask you to authorize. When you authorize, it will take you to your account. You'll probably see licenses here and view serial numbers. It should authorize kind of automatically, but you may need to copy paste the serial number one way or another. It should be noted too, after the 30 days is up, you still do have access to Live 12. You just won't be able to save projects or export the audio, like save the audio file from your work. If you do find after 30 days that you like Ableton, you could always purchase it for Ableton Basic for like a one-time fee of I think $99. I'm going to be showing Ableton Live 11 because I'm working out of 11. 12 is pretty new, and it should look very close to what you have. There may be some small aesthetic differences. Most of the functional differences won't really matter for the purpose and scope of this class. But yeah, so let's open a fresh project. So when you get everything up and running, you're going to open Ableton. You will probably see a screen that looks like this with these kind of vertical columns here with these slots. We're going to bypass this screen right now. Again, for the scope of this class, this might be a little bit more than we need. So I'm going to go hover over here, these three horizontal lines. I'm going to click right there. I can also use the tab button. This is one of the only keyboard shortcuts I'll talk about here, but I can use the tab button to bounce back and forth. We kind of want to be in this place right now. This is what's called arrangement view, because as we'll see, this is where the arrangement of your music will go. All right. So the first thing worth noting here before we get into what, just what's happening on the screen is to check your audio preferences. So if you're in PC, we're going to look at this kind of top row of options here. You're going to go to Options, Preferences. If you're on Mac, excuse me, and this will be one of the only differences between Ableton on Mac versus Ableton on PC. It's very similar on both operating systems. You'll see on Mac, you'll see a live option to the left of the file. And so you'll go Live Settings, and you'll it's the same as preferences here. So Options, Preferences. And in Preferences, you have these tabs that you can scroll through. Automatically starts you on the audio tab. That's where we want to be. We don't really have to worry about these others right now. So basically, an audio device is, we're telling the computer, or we're telling Ableton, how it's going to receive audio and how it's going to, output audio, right? So if you wanted to record something into Ableton, we need to know how that's going to happen. Is it from a USB microphone you might have? Is it from an audio interface? Maybe it's just from the microphone on your laptop. And then same for the output. How is the sound coming out of Ableton, right? Is it Is it coming out of your computer speakers? Is it coming out of your, the headphone jack in your laptop if you have that? Again, if you have an interface, is it coming out of that interface? So in my case, it's coming out of this interface. If I didn't have the interface up and running, you would see, laptop speakers, whatever your laptop is, it'll say speakers or headphones, and that's probably what you're going to want to choose. And it might automatically route to that. The reason for an interface is it's kind of just an external sound card, since we're dealing with a lot of sound sometimes in these programs. It helps to have a separate kind of sound card just for what we're working on, versus what's in the computer, and isn't always designed for this. But these are pretty low scope projects, so should be okay depending on what kind of computer you have to work here. And you can always use the computers in the computer lab on campus, where this is already installed and ready to go for you. So, and all this stuff is worked out. So just about there. So let's assume this is all taken care of. All right. The other section here up top, the other option up here, or drop down menu, that will be worth your time is file. And really that's just, if you want to start a new set, open a set you saved, or save a set, and we'll go through this at the end of this tutorial, how to export audio, right? And that's ultimately what you're going to be sharing with us as TAs and professor, is the exported audio, like the WAV file or the MP3, if you're familiar with those kind of file types, right? Okay, so I'm going to get rid of a couple of these tracks and make it a little bit easier. All right, a little bit simpler. So let's get into what Ableton is. All right. So I'm going to split this screen up into modules and try and dissect what's happening in these modules. And we're just going to pick the most important parts of each to help someone who's never been in Ableton achieve producing something in Ableton. All right. So I'm going to skip a lot of things that probably aren't relevant, but if you find you're enjoying it and you want to dive in, please explore, please be curious. It's cool. All right. So I also like kind of analogizing this to painting. All right. So I'm an audiovisual person, and I've found when I explain this in this way, it seems to help folks digest what all is happening here. All right. So we're going to analogize producing here to painting on a canvas. All right. So the first thing we should recognize is this little, well, not little, this is this kind of big horizontal module here. Hopefully you can see my mouse on Zoom. I hope that's being captured. But it's this module here with the grid space lines 1, 5, 9, 13, right? And we see, 2 tracks here that we've put in this this module. So this is called arrangement view. All right. You might think of this as the canvas that you would paint on, right? When you have all your paints and your paint brushes, you know what you want to paint. This is where your final painting is going to live. All right. And it works left to right, right? We see this grid moving numerically 1 to 57. And I could use this little magnifying glass. If I click and hold, I could even zoom in and move around that arrangement view, right? If I click, hold, and kind of scroll up, I zoom back out. Awesome, we're good. All right. So right now, in this arrangement view, we have 2 empty tracks. All right, we have a MIDI track and an audio track. And it's worth noting the distinction between either of these. All right. And so I'm going to start with MIDI because it's actually takes a little bit more to maybe wrap your head around what's happening with the MIDI track. So I'm going to try and explain this one through. And in the process, we'll learn about some of the devices that we can use to create music here. All right. I think the sound from this might come in a bit low. Turn it up a bit. So apologies, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. But these are the tracks to populate the canvas. All right. Excuse me, MIDI and audio. And with MIDI, I'd like to think of this as computer music language, all right? With MIDI, you're sending messages. You're not necessarily playing the actual note, right? When you play piano, when you play guitar, there's this kind of excitation of you striking a string or hitting a key on a piano and a hammer. You know, like there's this whole actual physical process that creates sound waves that kind of propagate into the real world, right? That's like how sound works in the real world. MIDI is just messages, right? So, for instance, if I was to go, let's see here. So I'm going to kind of zoom in right here to the very beginning of the session here, or of the arrangement, excuse me. And I'm just going to double click right there. All right. And I've created a little clip, right? We can kind of see that clip. Very little, empty, nothing there. Now that clip, when I double clicked on it, or when I clicked on it, we see something kind of pop up here. So what is this? So I'm going to bring this up a little bit. And this is really just kind of a zoom in of this clip. This is a representation, right? We see the clip goes from 1 to 1.2, 1 and 1.2 is kind of right there. So we're kind of looking at this clip. And in fact, this is a very short clip. I'm just going to make it a little bit longer. All right. So I'm going to spread it out just for the sake of this lesson here. There we go. There we go. Okay. So now the clip is this long. All right. And there's nothing here, right? So this is what we call a MIDI piano roll. And you can kind of see this representation of piano keyboard. If you know anything about music notes, not even music theory, but if you just kind of know music notes, you might recognize these numbers to the left, like C sharp 0, D 0, you know, E 0, F 0, F sharp 0, G 0, right? So these are the white and black keys of the piano. And I could, if I would like, just kind of double click right there. And maybe I double click right there. Maybe I double click right there. Right there. And we got 4 notes, and I'm going to kind of stretch them out. In fact, let's make these a little bit longer. So I'm just kind of clicking and holding, and I'm just kind of moving them around, right? So there we go. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just going to see that bracket right there. I'm just going to kind of like extend that out. So now I have these 4 messages. I'm going to hit this fold button, and it's going to get rid of all the extra notes that we don't need. So it's a little bit easier to see. All right. See that right there. Cool. All right. So really, we have 4 messages right now, right? B2, G2, F2, D2. A sequence of messages, one after the other. All of them are equally spaced apart. So think of this as like 4 descending notes. All right. So I press play. I don't hear anything. Why don't I hear anything? Well, I have 4 messages, but I haven't really sent those messages to an instrument. Something needs to receive those messages. All right. And that's where we go to our next little module. All right. So if this is the canvas over here, and we've started kind of painting in the canvas, it looks like. Things like we've painted, but we didn't put any paint on our brush yet, right? Like there's nothing here yet. So this next module contains all of our tools, our paint brushes, our paints, everything you can think of to kind of, you know, put this whole painting together. All right. Specifically in here, you're going to look in this leftmost row and or column and categories right here. All right. And in categories of everything here, you're mostly going to want to pay attention to the drums, the instruments, the audio effects, and the MIDI effects. All right. So let's start with instruments. Now, these are like virtual MIDI instruments. So what is a virtual MIDI instrument? It's it's a virtual instrument that is waiting to receive the messages that you're going to send it, right? And well, we've made some messages. We see them kind of represented right here. So, you can scroll through here, you can drop the little carrots down. There are synths in here. I mean, it's totally worth exploring all of these. We're going to swing back around and touch on drums as well. But I mean, yeah, electric, mallets. Let's see. That one's not. There we go. Right. And so hopefully you can kind of hear, excuse me. Hopefully you can kind of hear this. If you're not hearing anything on your side, look for this little headphone right there. If you click it on, it'll be blue and you should start hearing things. All right. And really that's just to sample. That's just for you to like listen to things that might sound cool, worth exploring. When you find something you like, you can use it. So let's go to piano, and I will pick out the electric piano basic. It's a very basic sound, right? And what I've done is I've clicked, I've held, and I've dragged it into this module here. Now, I'm going to get rid of it for a moment, and I'm going to redo this again because there's something worth noting here. Notice how when I click on this clip, we were used to seeing like a big zoom in of this clip, right? If I double click on it, we'll see it. Okay, awesome. But, well, then how are we supposed to drag an instrument down here? Because we have all this going on. That's where these tabs come into play. Way down here on the lower right-hand side. It's easy to forget about these. But they're going to let you kind of alter between the messages that you've been building, that you've been creating, and the chain of devices, the instruments, and the effects on the instruments, let's say, how they're going to receive the messages that you've been creating. And you kind of just bounce back and forth, altering your message, altering the thing that receives the message, or the collection of devices that receive the message, right? So right now, again, we see our message. Over here, we drag our piano in, and we're all set. We can also drag that piano directly into the track, right? And so that's worth noting as well. But that leads us to our next module, right? So we have, again, the canvas up here that we paint everything on, and we see that we've tried painting something. At the time, we didn't have paint on the brush, so nothing is happening, but we definitely had like the paint stroke down. Like we know what the shape of what we want to paint, right? So we go over to this module over here where we see collections and categories and, places and, like in subcategories right here. And we've chosen the tools that we want to use, the type of paintbrush, the colors of, paint that we're choosing for the instruments, let's say, right? And we found some cool stuff. All right. So now we've drugged that down here. Well, then what is this? This might be kind of where, like the palette, where you have all your paints, how you want to mix the paint together, the type of brush, how you want the paint to get on the brush. You're like sculpting the colors, you're sculpting everything so that when it finally hits the canvas, or when it's on the canvas, it's exactly what you want it to be, or close to what you want it to be, right? So, for instance, now we've added this piano on here, and I'm bringing this little like loop thing in here. In fact, show you looping real quick. This is an important one. So I have this clip. If I right click this clip and loop selection, you can see that little loop thing went on. It turned yellow. That's loop, right? So if I press play, it's going to loop over this sequence of messages that we just created. This is notes, just 4 notes going down. And again, I don't know how good sound is coming out on this, but hopefully you get the gist of sound. But you should hear 4 notes going down. All right, it's just looping over and over. All right, now this instrument is receiving our messages. That's awesome. All right. Now I mentioned you can put a lot of devices down here, right? And that introduces us to this idea of signal flow. And for us, let's just call it message flow. All right. Um, yeah, we created this message, we see it here. And now we're sending that message to this instrument. But there are devices called MIDI effects that act as intermediaries, right? Like you're gonna pass the message through them before you actually send it to the instrument. All right. So like, what does that mean? All right. So let's see. I'm going to stretch these notes out. I feel like this is going to be a ugly chord, but pretty in its own way. Let's see. I'm not that mad at it. There we go. Nice little jazz chord. All right, I'm going to fold this back up. Okay. So we have this chord playing. Cool. So without getting into the weeds of what all of these MIDI instruments do, I just want to show what one does as an example to think about how like this messaging works, right? And so like I said, MIDI effects, they're kind of the first step. They're the intermediary before the message gets to the instrument, in our case, the electric piano. So let's stop this first. All right. So I'm going to drop an arpeggiator in here. And what an arpeggiator does is it splits up. Right now our message is saying, hey, play all four of these notes at the same exact time, right? All start at one, all at the same time. The arpeggiator is going to split that up into a sequence, almost just like we had prior. It's going to say, hey, you're going to play one note at a time, moving upward or downward or down and up or converging or diverging or randomly, whatever. And there's a ton of other knobs you can twist to see, how you can affect what's happening with those notes. I'll show it here in a second. You can always, and this is worth noting, this kind of tiny little module over here. This is your info bar or your info view. As you hover over things, you'll kind of notice, oh, this is the synced rate of an arpeggiator. And maybe you don't know what all these words mean, and that's completely understandable and expected. So don't worry about it. The fun part of this, honestly, is just twist some knobs, see what happens. The only knob I recommend not twisting is a gain or volume knob all the way up, because you could really like hurt your ears or damage your speakers if you just blast it all the way up. Probably not, but it's better safe than sorry. Everything else though, have a ball. So let's hear this as a chord one more time. And then let's add the arpeggiator. All right, maybe I quicken the rate up. All right, change the offset, like which note it's going to start at which point. And again, you can kind of have fun with a lot of these. So there's you see some knobs here as well. These are some built-in effects because this instrument, we'll pause for a second, because this electric piano is kind of a pre-packaged sound from Ableton. You'll notice you can twist these knobs and starting to get some things happen here. All right, some reverb. All right. Yeah, cool. Let's move that up. All right. Okay. Those effects you're hearing bring us to our next category here, audio effects. So again, just to kind of verify or review, we created these messages, right? A2, G2, F2, D2. Those are our messages. Those are the notes that we want to be played, right? And we said, hey, play those through this instrument. But before you do, run it through this arpeggiator and split those notes up and do some cool things with those notes. Awesome. Now, pass it to this piano, electric piano, and it does what it does. So let's say we want to add some effects to what's being played. All right. So we look at audio effects. These are called audio effects because at this point we're hearing audio now, right? We're hearing the sound. just as when we get to audio tracks, you'll be dealing directly with audio sounds. No more messages. We're just, dealing with sounds. And so audio effects kind of work as the last stop in the message chain or the signal flow chain, right? We went from MIDI effects. From MIDI effects, we went to instruments. And by the way, if you want to kind of double click, that'll kind of fold up an effect. So if you ever see some folded up effects in this tutorial, that's kind of what you're seeing. All right. So, all right. So audio effects, the best example I can give here where you can hear it right away is an echo. All right. Let me take the delay feedback down or repetition down. Okay. So here we have our arpeggiator. Sound is coming out. We want to put some echo on that. All right. Some reverb on that. You can kind of decide, like just again, play around with all these notes or with all these dials. Some other ones worth exploring, EQ. Maybe I'll come back to the auto filter. Filter is a fun one. Very recognizable by folks. You've heard filter sweeps a lot in any club record in the past 15 years, probably. All right, so I think this covers the basic idea of a MIDI track. There's one other MIDI track I want to show you. So I'm going to right click in here. I'm going to create another MIDI track. All right. And this MIDI track is going to be a drum rack. So I'm going to go back to my categories, go up here to drums, and we see a drum rack right there. Now this is an empty drum rack. Just like a bunch of empty slots right here, right? You see the notes being represented again. It's just like the piano roll. They've just kind of repackaged all the piano notes into a drum pad. So this is like 4x4, and I could even go through different octaves and you can kind of see it all happening. Now, for the scope of this class, it's not, trying to build your own drum kit might be a lot. So you can kind of go through these existing drum kits and you can listen to something you like. All right, so say I like the 707 kit. I like all the sounds in there. I think I want to work with that. I'm going to just drag that right over this. And we should see it populate. There we go, with a bunch of sounds. And we even have some more effects we can add. Again, these are knobs you could twist. Again, be careful of that gain knob. That's the one that will get you very loud very quickly. But beyond that, I could press play and I can listen to all these drum sounds. Again, think of kind of like a drum pad on a controller. If you've ever seen like we've seen it in class, the producers with their controllers, the MPCs. All right, so this is kind of our digital representation of that, right? So just like we double clicked to create that right there, that our chords or our arpeggiated chords, I'm going to double click another clip there. All right. This is very short right now. If I try and stretch it out, right, notice how there are these like little lines there. Let's see if I can, hold on. No, it's not working. I'm going to try and zoom in. There are these like little dashes over on the top of this thing. That means these are loops. It's just going to like keep looping over and over and over again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the length of this MIDI clip. All right. So let's just change this to 2. All right, 2 bars. All right. Now I expand it out. There's no more lines. You kind of little divots. There's no more divots there. All right. This is helpful because we're going to zoom in and this is what we can start creating some drums with. All right. So I look here and I see a bass drum or a kick. Cool. All right. So pretty standard to, let's say, I'm going with the most generic thing possible. It's fun to play around with different patterns in here, but pretty standard to start a kick on 1, let's say 1.3, let's say 2, let's say 2.3. We have a snare. Let's put that 1.2, 1.4, 2.2, 2.4. Let's say a hi-hat, like every other is a hi-hat. Now a quick shortcut here. I'm going to click and hold in the gray space, highlight everything. It's okay, you can't do it that way, but Control C, shortcut for copy. I'm going to click where I want them to land, Control V. And there's some shorter cuts than this, but it's not worth getting in the weeds. So I kind of copy pasted these all. And if I play this now, I'm going to mute that electric piano, right? See how I turn that on and off. There's nothing in the audio, but I'll mute that just to be on the safe side. All right, and we're gonna play. Cool. I think I'm gonna slow it down just a bit to like 100 BPM. That's the BPM there. I'll run through that again when we review the top section here, but all right. Yeah. See how I'm kind of adding. Yeah, so you can kind of keep playing around with these. These even have like little velocities to them, right? You could say, hey, I want some of my hi-hats to be a little lower, a little higher, right? Adds to the swing, whatever. These don't have to just sit on the grid. You can kind of move them off for everyone who enjoyed like the kind of Jay Dilla off-kilterness thing. There's a very admittedly generic approach to this, but like, notice the snares are a little bit ahead and your hi-hats, maybe you move them up a little. Right, so this is like little things you can do and whatever. But the whole point here is you now have drums and you could bring back your piano. Well, cool. Now we're actually starting to get, as generic as it might sound, we got something. You're starting to kind of see how music is hopefully kind of being created here. The last track to talk about is the audio track, right? So now I don't have to mute these like that. If I want to just solo, I can solo the audio track. All right. So a couple things here. First is if you want to record yourself into a track, you're going to use an audio track, right? What you're going to do is you're going to arm that track. Notice how you can actually see my levels here. Hit that auto. All right, notice how you can kind of see my levels right here. And rather than pushing play right here, if I was to push record, and I'm talking in real time, and you can actually see me talking, and there you go. There's my audio. Awesome. All right, but let's say we don't want that. You could also directly bring in a sample. So here is a sample from a jazz fusion record from back in the day. All right, it is still kind of warming up here. Now see, when we had our MIDI clip, we could bounce back and forth between our kind of effects rack here and, oh shoot, give it a second. All right, we might have to be patient. Oh, come on. There we go. Cool. All right. So, we see the effects rack, we see our MIDI piano roll here when we've been dealing with MIDI. When we have a track, an audio track, we see the representation of kind of the waveform of that audio track. So a couple really quick things I'm going to offer if you do choose to go the route of sampling, and we're going to kind of show an example of sampling here. Without getting into the reasons why, there's this warp feature. Keep warp on, change it from Beats to Complex Pro. Notice how we can't really see my track up here, I'm going to press 0 to activate it. Now we see the track. Awesome. And this down here is just a representation of this up here. All right. So if I'm going to get rid of the loop, and right now we hear this fancy little jazz record. All right. All right. So in keeping with the spirit of the class, if you're thinking about wanting to, manipulate a sample to like loop it, you might do something like this. Notice we have our little grids here, right? And we see bars. We've kind of gone over bars in class, right? A bar filled with 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, if you put the metronome on, you would even hear it. Right? All right, hopefully that's coming through. So let's say I click right there and I right click and I split. And I go there, I right click and I split. Let's say I'll go there, I'll right click and I split and right click and split. All right, I'm going to move that one out the way a little bit. In fact, for the time being, let's just get rid of that. We'll come back around to it. I'm going to get rid of that too. We have these 3 samples. Now, I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit. And this is just this is not the most intuitive way to do this. In some ways it is. But it's just kind of showing you what's happening here. So I'm going to spread these out. And where do we want to go? Yeah, let's go there. Cool. All right. I'm going to right click. See, I've highlighted this one. I'm going to right click, copy, right click, paste, or Control V for paste, right? And now, all right, you got a loop. Let's do the same thing. All right. So you get it. You're starting to kind of hopefully, feel like, wait, there's something here. This kind of feels like what we've been trying to do. Now you can keep chopping up way more than just one loop at a time. You can really get micro with it. There's another way to go about doing this as well. I'm going to move those over here with our music, with our existing music, right? And actually, you can kind of hear this with drums. Like, let's play it with the drums. And let's bring the drums out a little bit more. I'm going to copy paste the drums. I'm just using Control C, Control V. Wonder if our arpeggiator will work with it too. It would have to be in key. All right, maybe not so much. Let's see if we can get a sound pretty close. All right, technically working. And here, just for the sake of making things sound a little nicer, since we're here. All right, I took it up an octave. I held Shift down, and then I hit the arrow key up. And I'm going to fold it back. All right. All right, so here, this little off kilter isn't really working for this one, so I'm going to quantize it back for the time being. All right, so anyway, you're kind of at least seeing how things might work in unison together, and maybe you bring that in there, and you kind of create, we talked about this with the Nas Made You Look for my sections. We talk about this with Nas Made You Look, you know, loops within loops. Like we have this loop. Let's take that out there for a minute. Right. So you kind of get it. And honestly, this is something just in itself. I could copy all of this, go right there, Control V, paste it, and boom, we're getting like, and then excuse me, in each of these sections, you know, you could change little things up. Maybe you decide to bring the, I'm gonna hit 0 to kind of deactivate these. Maybe you let it play for a little while like this, and then the keys come in, right? Maybe you want to take some of the drums out a little bit. So yeah, hopefully that's making sense. So cool. The other, I'll show this the other way if you really want to get into messing around with samples. Let's create a new audio track one more time. And I'm going to drag this sample again, or drag this sample in again. Where are we at? There we go. All right. This time it drags in quickly. I'm going to change that warp to Complex Pro. All right. So I'm going to highlight this. Remember, this is our track. We're going to just take some of it here. We're not going to take all of it. I'm going to right click. I'm going to slice to new MIDI. What we're going to do is we're going to turn an audio track into a MIDI track. Why are we doing this? Let's see. Oh, I got to make it a little bit shorter. All right, let's try this. Okay, let's do a real short one. That's right, I extended this out. Bear with me. All right, let's try that. Slice to new MIDI. There we go. All right, we're going to slice to transient. Don't worry about changing much of this. I'm going to hit OK. And slicing, 0 of 104. So we're going to let it slice. What we're doing is, what Ableton is doing, is it is converting every, like almost like at a micro, not a microscopic level, but at a very small level. When it says slice to transients, it's noticing all these little bulges in the waveform, and it's making a new kind of MIDI sound out of it. So if we go to the MIDI file, or the MIDI clip, look up here, it's kind of wild. You see all these clips. This is a lot happening right now, right? And just as we had MIDI clips up here, let's move zoom up. All right. This is we have MIDI clips up here by Unfold. We saw those 4. That's really all we're looking at here. So if I kind of highlight this and I was to play it, we're going to hear all these little sounds being represented in tiny little clips. So what does that mean for us? Well, if you don't want to just, or, you know, alongside chopping up audio, if you didn't want to just be dependent on chopping up audio, sorry, let's bring this down a little bit. There we go. So let's say I create a new clip here, just as we've been doing so far. All right, and I'm going to extend the length again to 2 bars here. All right, cool. All right, and I'm just going to start randomly. In fact, I'm going to use this little pencil up here, and we're just going to start, boom, just, this is going to be just weirdness, I'm sure. Let's just see what happens. So I'm going to play this clip by itself. All right. So then let's bring this in with the drums. Let's mute this one. We'll mute these keys. All right. Oops. Forgot we have this one. Let's let go of that. Let's get rid of that. All right, here we go. So now you're getting just more granular with it. And you could even, so, you know, here we have this very noticeable sample up here. It's kind of taking up a lot of space in the frequency range. It's like stuff all over the place. Maybe we go into audio effects. We see this filter. And we drop the filter in there. And we saw like in lectures, you know, we saw producers talking about low pass filtering to create bass lines. And again, you'll recognize this, just this kind of effect. Right, so maybe we have just a little bit of the bass line there, but all right. And then don't forget our little keys in here. We don't really need that one anymore. All right. So now all of a sudden you have like all these different components kind of coming together to form this track. All right. Last notes here, I think, are this top row. All right. Or a couple last notes. One is this top row. So we've seen here we have BPM. We've seen here, and BPM in action just looks like this. Like, right, getting slower, getting faster. We liked 100 BPM. We had the metronome right here. We kind of saw how that worked. We have our counter right here. We saw how that worked. Play, stop, record. Again, if you have a track armed to record, you can record it. Don't really worry about this too much. This is loop. That is of note. Lastly, your CPU, notice the CPU here. That's not the greatest in the world. So this is your CPU meter. Just lets you know how much space, you know, what your computer can handle before you might start hearing some noticeable audio crackles, dropouts, and such. For instance, when it gets a little too high, you'll see that CPU flash into play. There it goes. Didn't take much, but no crackle, so I'm not really worried about it. When the audio dropouts kick in, you might need to readjust like your buffer size, driver error compensation, things like that. And that's getting in the weeds. Hopefully you don't have to worry about that, but it's worth just sharing that in case you do hear some dropouts. Those are some things to pay attention to. The last thing I will offer up here, I've purposefully stepped away or stayed away from session view, right? So we've been in arrangement view this whole time. This is our canvas, again, the tools, you know, kind of the signal flow, where the messages are at, where you're sculpting, you know, what you really want to paint with. If I hit tab or go to these vertical 3 lines, again, you might recognize this as the screen that you saw when you first opened Ableton. This is a great affordance of Ableton. It's not worth getting into this just to make a track once for the hip hop course. If you are interested in getting deeper into it, I can definitely share insight on it. Some things worth noting about this screen, though, is if you'd like to kind of see the levels of, like the mixing levels of what you're doing, right? So if I start playing, we can kind of see like, well, which tracks are on, right? They're green, they're lighting up, and they're all routing to this thing called master. Well, that's master right there. And one thing you do want to try and make sure as you're preparing to export your audio is that this master is not like, you don't want it looking like this. because when you export it, it's going to, all right, when you export it, it's going to look like a big block of a WAV file, and it's not going to sound the best. So just make sure everything is always in the green, and you're pretty much good. And these little triangles are kind of how you adjust. Typically, don't even ever worry about adjusting the master. Usually you want to kind of use the little triangles here from each track that you're working with. And they're just kind of cool to kind of adjust levels. Like if you're playing and it feels like you want the drums louder, you can make the drums louder, you know, so on and so forth. Cool. Last thing I will show, I'm going to move back to arrangement view here. We have not saved this yet. So if I wanted to save this file, save live set as. All right. And let's say, all right. So it is saving right now. My computer's moving a little slow, but there we go. Now, something else of note, if you really do like what you've done and you really want to make sure you're saving every part of it, like all the samples you've put in, everything you've recorded, I go to collect all and save. I hit OK. And here we go. Now you have kind of a nice set of folders with this, like the imported samples, you know, like you kind of everything that you've been putting in here, all the instruments that you've used, all the drum sounds that I've used, they're saved in this folder. So if you ever took this to another computer and worked on it there, you could open the session up and know that all the components inside are available. You know, it won't say like a sample is missing or anything. Last thing, you're going to export audio and make sure render track is to master. It's automatic. Wave file, 16-bit depth is fine. 44,100 is fine. If this says 48,000, that's okay too. If this says 24 bits, that's fine too. Click on encode MP3. Click that on, and then just hit export. And it'll ask you where you want to export your file. So just pick a folder and you'll hit save. I'm not going to do mine here, but yeah, you'll hit save. It will export the file and you'll have a WAV and an MP3 of your final project. And yeah, that's about it. So if you have any questions, just reach out and good luck. All right.